Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Huffman, and today we're going to start to get into the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. Now, Jefferson's been with us for quite a while now, right? That we've been talking about him ever since kind of the days of the Declaration and the Revolution. And again, he's had a pretty storied career by this point as a diplomat, as a writer, as a thinker, as a leader, and even as a vice president to John Adams himself. And he served also as Washington's Secretary of State, which means he also was kind of involved in the foreign affairs of the nation. So Jefferson's had a long line of influence and a long line of power, even outside of being officially the president. But once he's elected, he's going to kind of continue to be ultra influential. Okay. And that election is going to take place for him in 1800. Okay, so remember I was talking about those Alien and Sedition Acts, which Adams had passed and he and the Federalist Congress had passed. Again, those were highly controversial and is going to basically make Adams unelectable, right? And he also had put out new taxes on houses, land, and enslaved Africans. So Adams only really served a term, and he's going to have massive trouble being reelected because he kind of, towards the end of his presidency, is going to start to do a lot of unpopular positions that in a lot of ways is going to make him unelectable. So since he's officially running, but he's not going to be that competitive, it really is going to come down to kind of the Republican nominees, which are Jefferson and Aaron Burr, also is going to campaign against all those policies Adams has as a Federalist, as well as the National Bank, which obviously Alexander Hamilton was a huge advocate for. Okay, so really, again, this is election. It's almost a three-person election. It's going to be Adams on one side, but he's not really going to win at all, and so it's going to come down between two Republicans, Democratic Republicans, former anti-Federalists, Jefferson and Burr. Okay, so as it turns out, Jefferson and Burr are going to tie the Electoral College vote, and both have 73 electoral votes. Adams was 65, so he's not totally, out of the race, so to speak, but it's really between Burr and Jefferson. Okay, so we haven't had many times this has ever happened, but if it's an Electoral College tie, that means the House of Representatives is the one who's going to have to decide on that. And as it turned out, Federalists were largely in control of the House of Representatives in 1800. So it's really going to be whoever the Federalists decide they want. And as it turns out, Hamilton, he himself is, again, a massive Federalist, and he didn't really like Jefferson or Aaron Burr. As if you've been in class and been watching Hamilton, you've maybe seen some of that. They really didn't like each other at all. But Hamilton says, you know what? I don't think Jefferson he's talking a big game, but I don't think he's going to do as much damage to all these things we've accomplished as Federalists in a short period of time. So you know what? And I'm going to persuade all of my backers and all of my followers to actually get behind Jefferson robbing Aaron Burr of the presidency. So again, it could have gone either way. It was very close, but due to Hamilton's influence, Jefferson's going to win. Burr, meanwhile, he's going to eventually find out about this, and naturally he's peeved. He's mad. And in 1804, they're going to have among that and other things, they're going to have a duel as a result of that, which takes Alexander Hamilton's life. So again, we've actually have remember under this system as it existed at this time, that whoever got the second most votes is the vice president. So Jefferson officially wins the presidency because of Hamilton and because of the Federalist influence, but Burr is going to serve as the vice president. And Burr and Jefferson, they had their own differences. They weren't the best of friends anyways. So our very own vice president in 1804 is actually going to take the life of the former Secretary of the Treasury in a duel. Okay, so Hamilton dies as a result of that, and Burr is going to kind of live the rest of his life kind of on the run of sorts, and is not really going to have any chance at any kind of national high office ever again. But back to Jefferson. What's the impact of all this for Jefferson? Well, this is also important to think about with Adams, that this was the very first election, right, where the incumbent president, the president in office, actually lost, okay? So there's a lot of questions. Oh, will Adams actually step down? Will he honor the election results? And as it turns out, Adams, in a very important, influential move, does stand down and say, no, you know what? Listen, Jefferson won this. And the thing is, too, again, Jefferson and Adams were actually pretty close friends, even though they disagreed on policy. So at this point, they kind of hit a bit of a rough patch. They'll kind of repair that in their later years when they're both out of Washington. But he's going to say, you know what? Listen, Jefferson won this race. I'm going to step aside. But at that time, it was a lot of questions of, will he actually do it, right? Because monarchs in Europe, they don't willingly give up their power, right? But Adams, wanting to honor this new office, says, you know what? I need to step down, and he ensures a peaceful transfer of power, which is very important, right, for maintaining the power and the honor and the dignity of the presidency. Okay. Jefferson himself realized how close he came to not winning this thing, right? That it came down to this electoral college vote, that he had to help influence people or get Hamilton on his side in the House of Representatives to go for him. And then also just the fact that Adams didn't necessarily have to, have a peaceful transfer of power. But the fact that he did, Jefferson's privately relieved by this and says, wow, this is in some ways seems like a revolution of 1800, right? So of all the elections we've ever had in American history, I would say 1800 is actually one of the most important for a variety of reasons. And we think elections now are crazy. This one was pretty crazy for its day as well. Okay. So how is Jefferson going to be different from Washington and Adams? Jefferson himself thought Washington and Adams, the first two presidents, acted a little too royal, right? That they acted, sure, they're called presidents and they're not necessarily, using their power in monarchical ways. But Jefferson thought, you know what? They act too much like royalty. I need to kind of get closer to the people. I want to democratize the office, meaning that I want to bring the office of the presidency down a notch. I don't want to act too highly of myself. I want to make sure that, the people feel like I'm one of them, which Jefferson was definitely not one of them, right? He was very rich. He was very wealthy. He owned many slaves, right? So when it came to, him and the average American, there would be lots of differences, right? He was a brilliant guy, but he was also pretty privileged. Nevertheless, he wants to try to democratize the office. So he's going to bring about his own new style, but he's actually going to keep many of those Federalist policies he had criticized, which also, kind of sets the precedent for somebody campaigning for president, saying they're going to overturn this, they're going to overturn that, they're going to get rid of this, get rid of that. And then they actually get into office and they realize, oh, you know what? That last guy, he actually had some good ideas. I'm not going to totally get rid of all of those. Okay. So he is going to change some things. Okay. But largely, a lot of those Federalist policies he criticized, including the national bank, he actually is going to mostly maintain. Okay. So that's going to be largely a good thing. Okay. He did want to start bringing down federal spending. He didn't want to spend as much money as Washington or Adams did. And he thought, you know what, instead of like a large national army, maybe we should just have smaller state-run or local-run militias to maintain our defense. Okay, so he's going to actually shrink the size of the military a little bit, not all the way, but shrink it a little bit and give more control and power over to these local militias. But again, a massive issue he had campaigned on a lot, the national bank, he's actually not going to touch. Okay, so he's not really going to do a lot with that. Realizes, you know what, we do need a national bank. We don't need to get rid of it. Okay, so he mostly actually shrugs and says, you know what, let's keep the national bank going. Okay, really one of, I would say, other than the Declaration, probably the most important thing Jefferson participated in or gave way to is going to be this Louisiana Purchase. Okay, and what was that? Jefferson had a strong feeling. This goes back to his ideas of agrarianism, where he thought, listen, the Americans should own their own land, and once Americans own their own land, they're going to get the best idea and understanding of what that means, and that's going to be the fullest, best version of themselves. Okay, so he's thought, listen, we have a young republic. Most people need to be landowners, and that way they can survive on their own, right? They don't have to worry about the government doing things for them. That if they own their own land, they can, farm their own crops, raise their own animals, right? That they can maintain a life for themselves if we get more land. So he wants to expand further west, okay? And that's going to naturally put him in opposition to the Spanish at first. But in 1800, technically before Jefferson took office, Spain is going to give France control of all of its North American holdings in its fight against Italy. So again, there's lots of these Napoleonic wars going on, okay, in Europe at the time. It's basically England versus everybody else, it seems like, or France versus everybody else, I should say. And England's kind of has a part in that. So a lot of craziness in Europe is going on. So Spain is going to give France control of all of its North American land, which is quite a bit to help in its fight, as I said, against Italy. Okay. So again, all that land that had been Spanish is now French. So now France, all of a sudden, who had been kicked out of the Americas, basically, now has once again a little bit of a stake in it. This really actually worried Jefferson because he thought, this could put me and France in direct competition with each other. And Jefferson was what we would call a Francophile, meaning he was deeply in love with French culture and kind of, again, he had sided with the French in the Revolution. And so he was very pro-France, and he didn't like this going on because he says, this might put me in direct competition with France. So Robert Livingston is going to basically act as an envoy to the United States. He's going to be sent over to Paris to negotiate basically over the course of 2.5 to 3 years in 1801 to 1803. And the reality is for France, they're broke. They're short on funds. They're fighting all these wars again against England and against kind of these other European powers. So they need money bad. So they realize, all right, you know what? Maybe we can strike a deal with America. What if we offer to sell all our lands in North America to the U.S.? And so in 1803, a deal is going to be struck, April 30th, 1803, that France is going to sell all of its North American holdings to the U.S. for a total cost of $15 million. Now, that's really, that's a lot of money for us, but for the federal government now, that's next to nothing. But even back in 1803, that was not that was not as much money as certainly all that land is worth. Okay, so we're really getting this land almost dirt cheap at a bargain. Okay, which is crazy to sound because France needs that money so bad to fight those wars. They're willing to take less than they're really worth. Okay, so the Senate's like, whoa, wait a minute. We can take all this land? Oh, definitely. And they overwhelmingly are going to approve of this because this is going to be a massive expansion of American power. Because, again, America was basically all this land right here before 1803. And through picking up this Louisiana Purchase, all of this land has just now been bought. And the size of the U.S. now goes from all this here to all of this here. Now, there is some land still over here that France and also Spain has some control over. But all this land here is now part of the U.S., okay? And that includes New Orleans, which had always been an important port for the French, the English, and now America. So all this land we're picking up, that's a massive, pickup for the United States. And the assignment we'll be kind of doing involves Lewis and Clark and that expedition where you're going to be learning a lot more about those two guys and their party who went out and to try to explore and map out and get a better understanding of what was here in all this land. Because a lot of them, vast majority of Americans had not even really made it out past this part here. Certainly hardly any, maybe a handful, 2 handfuls, a dozen or more had made it out here. So now all of a sudden, Lewis and Clark are going to be sent out by Jefferson to explore and understand what is definitely out there. Okay. So again, I would say other than the Declaration of Independence, that's probably the most important thing Jefferson did as far as just expand the territory of the United States. What else, though, did he do in terms of the judiciary, in terms of the courts? Okay, well, this is actually before Jefferson took office. Adams, as he and a lot of these Federalists had been voted out or leaving, they're going to pass a Judiciary Act, which is going to create 16 new federal judges, which Adams is going to stack with Federalists. Okay, so Adams realizes I'm on my way out. All of our Federalists were on the way out. So let's just try to pack the court with as many pro-Federalist judges as possible. That way, a lot of our policies won't be overturned by Jefferson or people in the future. And they're just going to get the nickname Midnight Judges because it was almost seemed like by the final hours before Adams leaves, he's signing this in. Okay, Republicans are naturally furious by this. Once Jefferson takes office, he's going to try to repeal all these acts. Okay, and even tries to impeach certain judges. Okay, in 1804, Samuel Chase is going to be impeached by the House of Representatives for kind of doing rulings that they weren't really in favor of. But the thing is, the Senate is not then going to convict Chase because he didn't commit crimes of treason or high misdemeanor, which means that, hey, listen, he wasn't actually kind of going out and kind of allying with an enemy or doing anything all that wrong or treacherous. So that means, you know what? That's going to set this precedent that we can't really get rid of Supreme Court justices unless they're really engaging in treason or some really bad form of corruption. Okay. Samuel Chase wasn't doing that. Okay. He was trying to try some things that federal or Republicans didn't like, but it wasn't necessarily really outright illegal, and it wasn't kind of outright allying with the enemy. Okay. So what this does, again, as I said, really establishes the Supreme Court and the judiciary as a wholly independent kind of part of the government. Right now, of course, the executive branch appoints the justices, and then it's the legislative branch who votes on and approves them. But once they're basically there in the judiciary, the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court, that is, that the presidency and Congress cannot really touch or do anything to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court's almost this bubble of wisdom, basically, that can't be touched by all these partisan squabblings of the executive and legislative branches. Okay, so a lot of kind of changes in the court are happening at this very moment and during this time of transition. So as I said, it sets this precedent that justices, once they're in office, again, unless they commit treason or something like really, really bad, like corruption, once they're a justice, they're basically going to be a justice for life. And it was only a matter of time, really, before such a thing was challenged, and it turned out to be kind of in these early 1800s. Okay. John Marshall, he's actually going to also be selected by Adams as the Chief Justice before Adams left office in 1801. And John Marshall's arguably going to be one of the most influential, important Supreme Court justices in our nation's history. He's going to serve for a total of 34 years, so from 1801 to 1835. So we're going to have a lot of presidents between now and then, right? And he's going to be directly responsible for establishing the Supreme Court as that powerful, independent branch of the federal government, right? So as all that kind of squabbling's happening with Jefferson and the Republicans versus the Federalists, Marshall's over there kind of to himself with the Supreme Court. And again, he's going to make sure that we're not going to be touched. We're not going to be addled by anything the president or anything Congress says. Okay. One of the most largest, most influential cases is still talked about today is Marbury versus Madison, which establishes the precedent of judicial review, which means that, listen, we got to decide whether or not Congress, the laws that they're passing, are constitutional, right? So basically every law that Congress passes, the Supreme Court looks at and says, okay, thumbs up, or if it's not, thumbs down and strikes it down. Okay, so that whole concept of judicial review, that it's, again, the judiciary that's making sure the legislative branch is passing everything and it's according to the law and it's according to the Constitution, then that's all going to be very important. And again, establishing the Supreme Court as its own independent kind of structure. Okay. So in the later days of Jefferson's kind of presidency, there is going to be a series of rising international tension. So Washington had kept us out of war. Adams had kept us out of war. For the most part, Jefferson's also going to do that, but some policies he makes actually is going to lead to one of our very first wars since the foundings of the nation. Okay. So for one thing, pirates had been raiding U.S. ships off the coast of North Africa in the Barbary states, basically in the Mediterranean, kind of in between Europe and Africa. We had ships over there, and pirates have been boarding these ships and forcing U.S. and Europeans to pay tribute, basically extortion, that, they board the ships and they say, all right, you're going to give us basically a little tax, or you're going to pay us some money before we let you set sail again, or maybe even take some of your goods. Now, this had been a policy that the other presidents had kind of turned a blind eye to, not really taken care of, and these other European powers also didn't really do anything about. But Jefferson, once he reaches office, he knows about this. He says, I want to make sure this practice is stopped. We need to put our foot down and tell these pirates that we're serious and we're not going to be extorted anymore. Okay. So he's going to try to stop this practice, and the kind of small nation of Tripoli is going to declare war on the U.S. in 1801, again, pretty quickly into Jefferson's time in office. So Jefferson is then going to send a naval squadron to that area, and this actually becomes the very first U.S. foreign conflict, okay, after the Revolution. So it's going to last for 4 years, and ultimately the American Navy is going to defeat these Tripoli pirates, okay? And if you know anything about the kind of Marine Corps, I believe it is the Marine Corps march or fighting song or whatever. It says from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. It's referring to the shores of Tripoli here. So that goes all the way back to this. Okay, so as a result of us beating these pirates, we're no longer being forced to pay any of these tributes. So this is a kind of a large foreign policy success for Jefferson, but it's also in some ways tied to a larger problem that is actually going to lead to a much larger war or conflict than even that was, okay? Because Great Britain, it's still fighting a lot of wars with France and some of these other European powers. They're going to begin this policy of impressment, where they basically legalize form of kidnapping, where Great Britain would board ships and force prisoners into military service, right? So what happened was a lot of British Navy men or men of the British Navy are going to basically, they're sick of fighting these wars. They're going to abandon ship and join other ships, sometimes ships of other nations, which naturally is going to, in some cases, include the United States. So now all of a sudden we have United States ships that are taking some of these deserters from Great Britain, and Great Britain saying, no, they're basically passing these ships and saying, you give us any British Navy men on there, we're going to take them back. And a lot of Americans ships were like, no, they're with us now, or they just straight up deny it. No, they're not here. And so again, Great Britain is going to start boarding these ships and taking them back, which naturally is going to raise the tensions between the U.S. and Great Britain. And very famously, the Great Britain ship, the Leopard, is going to stop the U.S. ship, the Chesapeake, and they're going to have a mini little conflict that breaks out. 3 Americans are going to be killed in this, and 4 British sailors are taken off the Chesapeake and brought back onto the Leopard. And they're all going to, once they're aboard, they're going to be impressed, okay, which means that they're being forced to be kidnapped and forced to be back into military service. Now, the media and citizens are clamoring for war, right? That they're saying, listen, we beat Great Britain the first time. Now they're kind of attacking our own ships, and we're not even really paying attention to the concept that they're taking their own men back. They're not taking American soldiers back or American Navy men. They're taking British soldiers back. But American citizens are still, listen, they're boarding our ships. Maybe we should go to war with Great Britain yet again. Jefferson, he wants to mostly stay out of European affairs again. And that actually separates him in a lot of ways from the guy he was acting like he was during the time of Washington and Adams, who were trying to steer us away from being too involved in European affairs while he was shouting about, no, we need to be. Once he's actually in office, again, he's going to start to realize, oh, you know what? Maybe Adams and Washington had a point. Maybe we should try to stay out of European affairs. So he's going to try to do that, but issues like this are going to really make that more difficult. And in 1807, in the very kind of last 2 years of his presidency, he's going to pass the Embargo Act, which is going to halt all trade between the U.S. and France and Britain, right? So we're not trading at all with France and Britain. That's going to start to hurt France and Britain's bottom line, especially Britain. And the kind of very next lecture I'm going to do on the War of 1812 is really born out of these kind of economic grievances by Great Britain to once again go to war with the U.S. So the next thing we're going to be talking about, the War of 1812, in some ways is the unofficial sequel to the American Revolution, where we fight Great Britain in a war yet again. Now, it's not going to be as large as the Revolution or last as long or be as important, but it still is going to be important in its own way. So that's and this is going to hurt actually the U.S. more than it does the other two, because the other two actually have a lot of international holdings. So it hurts the U.S., but it still does hurt France and Great Britain as well. So again, that was the presidency of Jefferson. Mostly successes, but also naturally some failures as well. And he's going to leave office in 1809, and his old buddy James Madison is going to rise to the presidency and be the president for the United States during the very crazy years of the War of 1812. And it doesn't just last in 1812. It lasts for some time. Okay, so this is Mr. Huffman signing off. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and ask me, and hope you have a great rest of your day.